Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper, where forgotten civilizations, unexplained wonders, and ancient secrets come back to life. Ready to unravel the mystery? Let's begin the journey. Off the coast of a remote Japanese island, a massive structure rests silently on the ocean floor. It has flat terraces, sharp, 90-degree angles, and what looks like a giant stone staircase rising from the depths. Some say it is a natural wonder. Others are convinced it is the ruin of a lost, ancient city, Japanese Atlantis swallowed by the sea. The story of the Yonaguni Monument does not begin in the hallowed halls of a university or in the dusty archives of a museum. It doesn't start with an ancient map or a cryptic legend passed down through generations. Instead, it begins in the deep blue waters of the East China Sea, with a man who was not looking for a lost city, but for sharks. Our story starts in the mid-1980s, on the tiny remote Japanese island of Yonaguni. Yonaguni is the westernmost inhabited island of Japan, a small windswept piece of land that is geographically closer to Taiwan than it is to mainland Japan. It is a place known for its rugged coastline, its powerful typhoons, and a unique small breed of horse. For most of its history, it was a quiet, isolated outpost, a place far from the hustle and bustle of modern life. But in the world of scuba diving, it was beginning to gain a reputation for one thing in particular: its spectacular winter congregations of hammerhead sharks. The man at the center of our story is Kahachiro Aratake. Aratake was not an archaeologist or a geologist. He was a local businessman, the director of the Yonaguni-cho Tourism Association. He had spent his life on the island, and he understood that its future depended on attracting visitors. Seeing the growing interest in scuba diving, he had dedicated himself to exploring the waters around his home, charting the reefs, and discovering the best spots to show tourists the incredible marine life. He was a pioneer of the island's diving scene, a man who knew the underwater landscape of Yonaguni like the back of his hand. He had spent countless hours beneath the waves, navigating the currents and mapping the seabed in his mind. He was intimately familiar with the natural rock formations, the coral gardens, and the deep canyons that surrounded the island. But in the winter of 1986, he was about to find something that was not on any chart, something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the waters he called home. Aratake was on a mission. He was scouting a new area off the southern coast of the island, a spot known as Arakawa Point. He was hoping to find a new reliable location where he could take tourists to witness the majestic schools of hammerheads that gathered in the area. He put on his gear, slipped over the side of the boat, and descended into the clear blue water. As he drifted deeper, leaving the sunlit surface world behind, the familiar underwater scenery came into view. He expected to see the usual terrain: rounded coral reefs, sloping beds of sand, and the natural chaotic jumble of rocks shaped by millennia of ocean currents and tectonic activity. But as he descended further, to a depth of about 80 feet, something caught his eye. It was a shape, a form that was utterly alien to this environment. It was too big, too straight, too organized. He swam closer, his curiosity piqued. What he saw next left him stunned. Rising from the seabed below him was a colossal stone structure. It was not a random collection of boulders. It was a single monolithic mass of rock, immense and imposing. Unlike the rounded, natural forms around it, this structure was dominated by straight lines, sharp corners, and vast, flat surfaces. It looked less like a reef and more like a building. As he slowly circled the formation, a sense of disbelief washed over him. He saw what appeared to be a massive, wide terrace perfectly level like a giant plaza. From this terrace, a series of enormous steps seemed to ascend, each one cut at a near-perfect 90-degree angle. The scale was staggering. The entire structure was easily the size of a modern football field. A giant, multi-tiered platform resting in the silent depths. Aratake, a man who had spent his life in these waters, had never seen anything like it. Felt wrong. It felt artificial. felt, in a word, impossible. He knew in that moment that he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. He had gone looking for sharks, but he may have found a lost world. When Aratak surfaced, his mind was racing. He tried to process what he had seen, but it defied all logical explanation. Was it possible that a giant man-made structure lay hidden just off the coast of his small island? He had to be sure. He returned to the site again and again, each time bringing a camera, trying to capture the sheer scale and strangeness of what he had found. He began to meticulously explore the structure and its surroundings. The more he looked, the more unnatural features he seemed to find. He identified what he believed to be a road or a pathway that encircled the base of the main structure. He found two large pillar-like rocks that stood side by side, looking like the remnants of a gateway. He found a long straight channel carved into the rock, flanked by two parallel walls, that he dubbed the Loop Road. He discovered a triangular depression in one of the terraces that he called the Turtle Pool, because of its shape. He wasn't just seeing one structure. He was seeing what looked like an entire complex, a planned environment. The central structure, with its giant staircase-like terraces, became the focal point. Because of its monumental and seemingly sacred nature, it was given a name, the Yonaguni Monument. But Aratak knew that his claims were extraordinary, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. As a local tour operator, he knew his story would be met with skepticism. He needed to bring in experts. He began to talk about his discovery, showing his photographs to anyone who would listen. He contacted journalists, television crews, and academics, urging them to come to Yonaguni and see the underwater mystery for themselves. Initially, the reaction from the mainstream academic community in Japan was muted. Many were quick to dismiss his findings without even visiting the site. They suggested that he was an amateur, a well-meaning but untrained observer who was simply misinterpreting a natural geological formation. The idea of a massive man-made structure dating back thousands of years was too radical, too far outside the established understanding of Japanese prehistory. But Aratak was persistent. His passion and the compelling nature of his photographs began to attract attention. News of the Yonaguni Monument started to spread, first through the diving community, and then to a wider audience. Divers and amateur explorers from all over the world began to flock to the small island, all eager to see the underwater enigma for themselves. The site became a legend in the world of scuba diving, a place of mystery and wonder. The real turning point, however, came when Aratak's story captured the interest of a respected, if somewhat controversial, academic. This was Professor Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus in Okinawa. Unlike many of his colleagues, Kimura was intrigued by Aratak's claims. He was a scientist with an open mind, willing to investigate phenomena that others might dismiss out of hand. In the early 1990s, Kimura decided to lead a formal scientific expedition to study the monument. He assembled a team of divers and researchers and began a long-term project to map, measure, and analyze the underwater structure. For the next decade and a half, Kimura would become the leading and most vocal academic proponent of the theory that the Yonaguni Monument was man-made. Kimura's team conducted extensive underwater surveys. They created detailed 3D models of the main structure and the surrounding formations. They took rock samples and meticulously documented every feature that seemed to defy a natural explanation. Kimura's methodical approach lent a new level of credibility to the theory. He was no longer just a local diver making fantastic claims. He was a university professor with a team of researchers backing him up. And Kimura's conclusions were even more radical than Aratak's initial suspicions. He became utterly convinced that the structure was not natural. He identified what he called definitive proof of human intervention. He pointed to the numerous right angles and the symmetry of the main terraces, arguing that such features are exceptionally rare in natural sandstone formations. He claimed to have found small, circular holes in the rock that looked like post holes, evidence that wooden pillars or structures might have once stood on the stone platform. He highlighted a feature that he called the drainage channel, a series of grooves carved into the rock that he believed were designed to carry away water. Most dramatically, Kimura began to identify other, smaller formations in the area that he believed were deliberately carved sculptures. He agreed with Aratake's identification of the Turtle Rock, but he went further. He identified another formation that he claimed was a giant, carved human head, seen in profile. This Yanaguni head or human-faced rock bore a striking, if crude, resemblance to the famous Moai statues of Easter Island, with the distinct brow, nose, and mouth. The discovery of what appeared to be deliberate figurative art was, for Kimura, the smoking gun. Nature can create straight lines and right angles through geological processes, but nature, he argued, does not carve giant faces into the side of a cliff. He concluded that what Aratake had discovered was not just a single monument, but the ruins of an entire city complex, complete with a castle, a stadium, and connecting roads, all carved out of the bedrock. This led Kimura to an even more astonishing conclusion about the age of the site. The monument is currently under 80 feet of water, but it is made of solid rock, meaning it must have been built on dry land. The only time in recent geological history that this area was above sea level was during the last ice age, when vast amounts of the world's water were locked up in glaciers and sea levels were much lower. The last ice age ended around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. As the glaciers melted, sea levels rose dramatically, eventually submerging the land on which the city was supposedly built. This meant, according to Kimura's logic, that the Yanaguni monument had to be at least 10,000 years old. This date was an absolute bombshell. It was a direct challenge to every established timeline of human history. 10,000 years ago, mainstream archaeology holds that most human societies were small, nomadic groups of hunter-gatherers. They were using simple stone tools. The great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia were still more than 5,000 years in the future. The idea that a prehistoric Stone Age culture had the social organization, the engineering skills, and the sheer manpower to carve a city-sized monument out of solid rock was unthinkable. It would mean that a highly advanced, unknown civilization existed in the deep past, a civilization that flourished and then vanished without a trace, leaving behind only this single, enigmatic underwater ruin. Kimura's theory was not just about a Japanese mystery, it was about a global one. It hinted at a lost chapter in the story of humanity, a mother culture that predated all known ancient civilizations. The accidental discovery made by Kahachiro Aratake while looking for sharks had now spiraled into a world-altering hypothesis, a theory that, if proven true, would force us to completely rewrite the history of the human race. The quiet waters off a remote Japanese island had become the stage for one of the most profound and controversial archaeological debates of our time. The monument was no longer just a local curiosity. It was the potential key to unlocking a secret history of our own ancient past. The initial discovery of the Yanaguni monument by Kahachiro Aratake was a moment of pure, unadulterated shock, a sudden confrontation with something that seemed utterly out of place in the natural world. But as the years went by and more explorers, divers, and researchers were drawn to this underwater enigma, the initial shock gave way to a more focused and determined investigation. The central question shifted from "what is this?" to "could this possibly be man-made?" For a growing number of people, including respected academics like Professor Masaaki Kimura, the answer to that question was a resounding yes. The argument for the monument being an artificial structure, a lost city from a forgotten age, is not based on a single piece of evidence, but on a collection of features that, when viewed together, seem to defy a natural explanation. It is an argument built on geometry, on apparent artistry, and on a geological timeline that points to a truly ancient origin. To understand their case, we must dive back down into the silent, blue depths and look at the monument through their eyes, piece by compelling piece. The first and most powerful argument, the feature that mesmerizes every diver who visits the site, is the structure's incredible geometry. The main monument, often referred to as Structure Number 1, is not a gentle, sloping mound or a chaotic pile of rocks. It is a symphony of straight lines, flat surfaces, and sharp, clean angles. The most dominant feature is a series of massive, wide terraces. These are not small, random ledges. They are enormous, flat platforms, some stretching for dozens of feet, that rise up from the seabed in a stepped fashion. They look for all the world like a grand staircase or the tiered base of a ziggurat or a Mesoamerican pyramid. The edges of these terraces are remarkably straight, and the corners where they meet often form near-perfect 90-degree right angles. Proponents of the man-made theory argue that nature, while capable of creating incredible beauty, very rarely works with this kind of precision and repetition. Ocean currents and geological forces tend to create rounded, eroded, and irregular shapes. They do not, as a rule, carve giant, perfectly level plazas and staircases into the side of a mountain of rock. One of the most famous sections of the monument is a feature known as the main terrace and the upper terrace. Divers can swim along the edge of these platforms for long distances, and the straightness is uncanny. It feels as if you are swimming alongside a giant, submerged city wall or a massive stone quay. The corners are so sharp that they look as if they were cut with a tool. Professor Kimura and his team have spent countless hours measuring these angles, and they consistently find right angles and other deliberate-looking geometric forms throughout the structure. They point to two massive parallel stone blocks that form what looks like a channel or a gateway. They highlight a feature called the stage, a raised platform with a distinct, straight-edged backdrop that looks for all the world like a place for ceremony or performance. They also point to the overall design of the main monument. It seems to be oriented along the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, a common feature in ancient sacred architecture around the world. The entire structure feels intentional. It doesn't look like a random product of chaos. It looks like a product of design. The proponents ask a simple question. If this is a natural formation, where else in the world can we find a single monolithic sandstone formation that has naturally eroded into a series of perfectly straight, tiered platforms with 90-degree corners? Mainstream geologists can point to formations with some similar characteristics, like the basalt columns of the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, but nothing that matches the scale, complexity, and architectural feel of the Yonaguni monument. For believers, the geometry is the first and most undeniable proof. They argue that the mathematical probability of nature carving all of these straight lines, right angles, and symmetrical terraces into a single piece of rock is so infinitesimally small that it is more logical to conclude that it was shaped by intelligent hands. The second pillar of the argument moves beyond geometry and into the realm of art and symbolism. If the monument were truly a city or a ceremonial center, one would expect to find more than just architectural forms. One would expect to find statues, carvings, and other expressions of the culture that built it. And according to proponents of the theory, that is exactly what they have found. As divers explored the area around the main monument, they began to identify a number of smaller, separate rock formations that did not look natural. They appeared to be deliberate, figurative sculptures, hewn from the living rock. The most famous of these is a feature that Kahachiro Aratake dubbed the turtle. It is a large, low-lying rock formation that, when viewed from the right angle, bears an uncanny resemblance to a giant sea turtle. It has a distinct rounded shell-like shape, a head, and what look like flippers. Believers argue that the shape is too specific, too animal-like to be a coincidence. They see it as a piece of zoomorphic sculpture, a sacred animal effigy, perhaps representing a deity or a totem of the people who lived there. Turtles are significant creatures in many ancient mythologies, often associated with longevity, creation, and the earth itself. The presence of what appears to be a giant turtle statue seems to fit perfectly with the idea of the monument as a sacred ceremonial site. Even more striking is the discovery of what Professor Kimura has identified as a colossal human face, carved in profile into a separate nearby cliff face. This feature, often called the Yanaguni head, or the moai, has become an iconic image of the mystery. Proponents claim that one can clearly distinguish a brow line, an eye, a nose, a mouth, and a chin. Some have even suggested that it wears an elaborate headdress, similar to those seen in some Native American or Polynesian cultures. The resemblance to the famous moai statues of Easter Island is often highlighted. The moai are also large, stylized human heads that are believed to represent deified ancestors. The theory suggests that the Yanaguni head could be a similar kind of ancestor portrait, a giant guardian watching over the sacred city. For Kimura and other believers, these apparent sculptures are the nail in the coffin for the natural formation theory. They argue that while geology can sometimes produce geometric shapes, it cannot produce figurative art. The creation of a recognizable image of an animal or a human face requires intent, intelligence, and artistry. They challenge geologists to explain how random erosion could carve a rock into the shape of a turtle or a human head. They see these carvings as the undeniable signature of the monument's builders. They have also identified other, more abstract markings on the rocks. In one area, there are what appear to be two eyes carved into a stone, looking out from the rock face. In another, there are strange looping symbols that some have tried to interpret as a form of unknown writing. While these are more open to interpretation, they add to the overall sense that the rocks of Yanaguni have been deliberately marked and shaped. The argument is simple: when you find what looks like architecture, and then, right next to it, you find what looks like art, you are no longer in the realm of geology. You are in the realm of archaeology. You are looking at the ruins of a civilization. This leads directly to the third, and most mind-bending pillar of the argument, the geological timing. This is where the theory moves from a local Japanese mystery to a story with profound implications for all of human history. The Yanaguni monument is currently submerged in about 80 feet of water. It is made of solid sandstone, which means it is part of the underlying bedrock of the island. It is not a structure that was built underwater. It had to have been carved and shaped when it was on dry land, exposed to the air. The critical question then becomes, when was this area last above sea level? This is a question that geologists can answer with a high degree of certainty. The sea level of our planet has not been constant throughout history. During periods of glaciation or ice ages, vast quantities of the Earth's water are frozen in massive continental ice sheets. This locks up so much water that the global sea level drops dramatically. The last major ice age reached its peak around 20,000 years ago. At that time, sea levels were as much as 400 feet lower than they are today. As the planet began to warm up and the glaciers started to melt, the sea levels began to rise. This process, known as marine transgression, was not instantaneous. It was a gradual process that took thousands of years. Geologists have studied the local geology, the coral reefs, and the sedimentary deposits around Yanaguni. Based on this data, Professor Kimura and other geologists have calculated that the land on which the monument sits would have been submerged by the rising seas sometime around 10,000 years ago. This date changes everything. If the monument is man-made, and it had to have been built on dry land, then it must be at least 10,000 years old. This makes it more than twice as old as the Great Pyramid of Giza. It predates Stonehenge by some 5,000 years. It would have been built thousands of years before the rise of the first known civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt. At that time, according to our standard historical model, the world was populated by what we call Jaman culture in Japan, or more broadly Neolithic Late Stone Age peoples. These were cultures of hunter-gatherers and early farmers. They lived in small semi-nomadic communities. They used tools made of stone, bone, and wood. While they were capable of creating beautiful pottery and living in complex settlements, There is absolutely no evidence that they possessed the kind of large-scale social organization, the advanced engineering knowledge, or the quarrying technology required to undertake a construction project of this magnitude. Carving a single structure the size of a football field, complete with massive terraces and other features, out of solid bedrock would have been a monumental undertaking, even for a civilization with metal tools. To suggest that a Stone Age culture could have accomplished it is a truly radical claim. It would be like finding a smartphone in a medieval castle. It simply doesn't fit the established timeline of technological and social development. Proponents of the man-made theory embrace this radical implication. They argue that the Yonaguni Monument is definitive proof that our understanding of the ancient past is wrong. They believe it is the physical remnant of a highly advanced, lost civilization that flourished during the Ice Age. This hypothetical civilization, sometimes referred to as the lost civilization of Mu or Lemuria in more esoteric circles, would have been a global seafaring culture that was wiped out by the cataclysmic flooding at the end of the Ice Age. The story of its demise, they argue, has come down to us in the form of universal flood myths, like the story of Noah's Ark or the legend of Atlantis. The Yonaguni Monument, in this view, is the Japanese Atlantis, a city that was swallowed by the waves, its existence forgotten by history until its accidental rediscovery in 1986. For believers, the geological timing is not a problem for the theory. It is the theory. It is the proof that a great unknown chapter of human history has been missing from our books. They argue that we have underestimated our ancient ancestors, and that the ruins off the coast of Yonaguni are a silent testament to their lost genius. Together, these three arguments, the impossible geometry, the deliberate artistry, and the staggering antiquity, form the powerful and seductive case for Yonaguni being a man-made city. It's a case that appeals to our sense of wonder and our suspicion that there is more to our history than we are being told. It presents a clear, visual, and compelling set of evidence that seems to defy all conventional explanation. It challenges us to look at the sharp corners, the flat terraces, the turtle, and the giant stone face, and to ask ourselves a simple, profound question. Does this look like the work of nature, or does this look like the work of intelligence? For those who stand on the side of a lost civilization, the answer is as clear as the blue water in which the mystery lies. They believe they are not just looking at rocks. They are looking at the last lonely outpost of a forgotten world. The case for the Yonaguni Monument being a man-made city is a powerful and deeply alluring one. It speaks to our innate sense of wonder, our love of a great mystery, and the romantic idea that a lost golden age of humanity is waiting to be rediscovered. The images of its sharp corners, its grand terraces, and its supposed sculptures are compelling, and they seem to cry out for an extraordinary explanation. But in the world of science, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And when we turn away from the passionate arguments of the proponents and listen to the cool, methodical analysis of mainstream geologists and archaeologists, a very different picture of the monument begins to emerge. It is a picture that is perhaps less romantic, but it is one that is grounded in the established principles of the natural world. The scientific explanation does not require us to believe in lost civilizations or ancient super-technologies. Instead, it asks us to look more closely at the rock itself, to understand the powerful forces that shape our planet, and to acknowledge the very human tendency to see patterns where none exist. The first and most fundamental point in the scientific explanation is all about the rock. The Yonaguni Monument is composed entirely of a specific type of rock from the Yayama group, a medium to fine-grained sandstone and mudstone that was deposited in the deep ocean millions of years ago. And for a geologist, the type of rock is everything. It is the key that unlocks the entire mystery. Sandstone is a sedimentary rock, meaning it was formed from layers of sand and mud that were compressed over eons. A key characteristic of this type of rock is that it has natural bedding planes, the horizontal layers that mark the different periods of deposition. It is also a rock that is crisscrossed with numerous joints and fractures, which are straight-line cracks caused by the immense stress of tectonic activity, the same forces that cause earthquakes and build mountains. Mainstream geologists like Dr. Robert Schoch of Boston University, who have dived on the site and studied its features, argue that the entire structure can be explained by these natural geological properties. Let's start with the most impressive feature: the giant, flat terraces and the sharp 90-degree angles. According to geologists, these are not man-made. They are the natural result of the rock's tendency to fracture along its bedding planes. The wide, flat terraces are simply the exposed tops of these natural layers of sandstone. The straight, vertical walls are the result of the rock splitting along its vertical joints. When a horizontal bedding plane intersects with a vertical joint, it naturally creates a 90-degree angle. This is not a rare or mysterious phenomenon. It is a basic principle of structural geology. Sandstone formations all over the world exhibit these characteristics. While the Yonaguni Monument is a particularly large and spectacular example, its core features, the straight lines and right angles, are not unnatural. They are the predictable result of erosion acting on a well-bedded, heavily jointed sandstone formation. The powerful ocean currents that sweep past Yonaguni Island act as a giant, natural sculptor. For thousands of years, the water has been scouring away the softer parts of the rock, breaking off pieces along these pre-existing lines of weakness. The result is a structure that looks blocky and architectural, but it is an architecture designed by nature, not by man. Dr. Schoch has pointed out that the monument is, in fact, still connected to the larger rock mass of the island. It is not a separate structure built on the seabed. It is a part of the underlying geology that has been weathered into its current shape. He also notes that he has seen similar formations in other parts of the world, such as the strange, block-like rock formations off the coast of Malta. The scientific explanation, therefore, is that the monument's stunning geometry is not a sign of artificiality, but a textbook example of natural erosion acting on a very specific type of rock. The second part of the scientific case tackles the artistry, the supposed sculptures like the turtle and the human face. This is where geology intersects with the science of human psychology. Scientists explain these features as classic examples of a phenomenon known as pareidolia. Pareidolia is the brain's innate tendency to perceive a familiar pattern, especially faces, in random or ambiguous stimuli. It is a deeply ingrained part of our evolutionary wiring. It's why we see a man in the moon, animals in the clouds, or the face of a religious figure on a piece of toast. Our brains are hardwired to find meaningful patterns, particularly faces, because recognizing a face quickly was a crucial survival skill for our ancestors. A rustle in the grass could be just the wind, or it could be a predator. The brain that defaults to seeing a face, even if it's not there, is the one that is more likely to survive. When a geologist looks at the Yonaguni head, they do not see a carved statue. They see a collection of natural rock features: a jutting ledge that looks like a brow, a vertical fracture that looks like a nose, a horizontal crack that looks like a mouth that, when viewed from one specific angle with the right lighting and shadows, happen to resemble a human face in profile. They argue that if you look at it from any other angle, the resemblance disappears. It is a geological illusion, a trick of light and shadow, amplified by our brain's powerful desire to find a face. The same explanation applies to the turtle rock. It is a rock that has been weathered into a generally rounded shape, and with a bit of imagination, it can be interpreted as a turtle. But there are no definitive tool marks, no clear signs of carving. There is nothing to suggest that a human hand has deliberately shaped the rock into that form. This is a critical point that scientists repeatedly make: the complete lack of verifiable tool marks. If a culture had carved these massive structures, they would have used tools, whether they were simple stone picks or more advanced metal chisels. This process would have left behind telltale signs, striations, gouges, and peck marks on the surface of the rock. Despite years of searching by numerous scientific dive teams, no such conclusive evidence has ever been found. The surfaces of the rocks are consistent with natural weathering and erosion, not with quarrying or carving. The small, round holes that Professor Kimura identifies as postholes are explained by geologists as natural potholes, formed by smaller, harder rocks being swirled around by the current, grinding a circular depression into the softer sandstone over time. The drainage channels are simply natural grooves formed by water erosion following lines of weakness in the rock. For every unnatural feature that the proponents point to, mainstream scientists have a plausible, and often simple natural explanation that is consistent with the known geology of the area. They argue that seeing these features as art or architecture is an act of imagination, not of scientific observation. This leads us to the third, and perhaps most powerful argument against the man-made theory, the profound and deafening silence of the archaeological record. Let's assume for a moment that the proponents are correct. Let's assume that a highly advanced civilization existed on Yonaguni 10,000 years ago, a civilization capable of organizing a massive workforce to carve a city out of bedrock. If such a society existed, the monument itself would be just one piece of the puzzle. They would have left behind other traces of their existence. Archaeology is the study of the stuff that people leave behind. A culture that could build the Yonaguni monument would have also had houses, workshops, and graves. They would have used tools, made pottery, worn jewelry, and discarded their trash. These things, the mundane, everyday objects of a civilization, are what archaeologists look for. And on and around the Yonaguni monument, they have found nothing. Despite the intense interest in the site and the numerous dives conducted there over the past 3 decades, not a single unambiguous man-made artifact has ever been recovered from the monument itself. There are no stone tools, no broken pottery shards, no bone implements, no burial sites. Nothing. The only artifacts found have been in different locations and from much later periods. The complete lack of associated artifacts is, for archaeologists, a massive red flag. A great monument does not exist in a vacuum. It is the product of a culture, and that culture would have left its fingerprints all over the surrounding area. The fact that the Yonaguni monument is archaeologically sterile, completely devoid of the supporting evidence one would expect to find is perhaps the single most compelling argument that it is not an archaeological site at all. This argument extends to the broader context of Japanese and world prehistory. The idea of a 10,000-year-old supercivilization simply does not fit with anything else we know about the period. We have extensive archaeological records from the Jomon period in Japan. We know what their settlements looked like, what tools they used, and how they lived. They were a sophisticated and fascinating culture, but they were not pyramid builders. There is a complete disconnect between the known capabilities of the people who lived in that region at that time and the supposed technological and social requirements for building the Yonaguni monument. To believe the monument is man-made, you have to believe in a civilization that existed in complete isolation, developed technology thousands of years ahead of its time, built one single colossal structure, and then vanished from the face of the earth without leaving a single other trace of its existence. From a scientific and archaeological perspective, this is a far more unbelievable story than the idea that a sandstone formation can be eroded into a strange shape. In science, there is a principle known as Occam's razor. It states that when faced with competing explanations for a phenomenon, the simplest explanation, the one that requires the fewest new assumptions, is usually the correct one. In the case of Yonaguni, we have 2 competing explanations. The first, the man-made theory, requires us to assume the existence of a previously unknown, highly advanced Ice Age civilization, a civilization for which we have no other evidence. It requires us to assume they developed incredible engineering skills and then vanished without a trace. The second explanation, the natural formation theory, requires us to assume only that the known, established principles of geology and erosion are at work. For the vast majority of the scientific community, the choice is clear. The natural explanation is far simpler, more elegant, and more consistent with the available evidence. In the end, the scientific verdict on the Yonaguni Monument is that it is a fascinating and spectacular natural wonder, a geofact rather than an artifact. It is a place where the unique properties of the local rock have combined with the powerful forces of the ocean to create a landscape that mimics human architecture with astonishing fidelity. It is a geological illusion, a Rorschach test on a monumental scale, onto which we project our own desires for a more mysterious and romantic past. The story of Yonaguni is not a story about a lost city, but a story about the human brain's incredible capacity for pattern recognition and our enduring fascination with the unknown. It is a powerful reminder that nature itself can be the greatest and most surprising architect of all, capable of creating structures so strange and so geometric that they fool us into believing they must have been made by hands like our own. The mystery of Yonaguni for science is not about who built it, but about appreciating the beautiful and deceptive power of the natural world. The Yonaguni Monument remains one of the world's most compelling underwater mysteries. It sits in a gray area where the lines of geology and archaeology blur. Is it a testament to the awesome power of nature to create geometric forms, or is it the last remnant of a lost civilization from the dawn of time, silently waiting for its story to be told? On a lonely plain in England, a ring of ancient stones guards a 5,000-year-old secret. Who had the power to build Stonehenge and for what purpose? Was it a temple for the dead, a celestial clock, or something far stranger? Before we can even begin to speculate on the hidden purpose of Stonehenge, whether it was a tomb, a calendar, or a gateway to another world, we must first confront the most immediate and staggering mystery of all, the fact that it exists. We must stand on the windswept Salisbury Plain and grapple with the question that has baffled historians, engineers, and archaeologists for centuries. How was this thing even built? In our modern world of steel cranes, hydraulic lifts, and powerful machinery, it is easy to lose our sense of scale, to forget what a truly monumental undertaking the construction of Stonehenge was. The people who built it, living over 5,000 years ago in the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, had no iron tools. They had no wheels for transport. They had no written language to record their complex plans. And yet, they conceived of, engineered, and executed one of the most sophisticated and enduring stone structures on the planet. To understand the mystery of its purpose, we must first appreciate the near impossibility of its creation. This was not just building. This was an act of collective will so immense, so organized, and so audacious that it borders on the miraculous. Our investigation into this impossible feat begins not at the famous stone circle itself, but far away, in the hills and quarries where the story of each massive stone began. The builders of Stonehenge did not simply use whatever rocks were lying around. They were incredibly selective, choosing two very distinct and special types of stone, sourced from two different and very distant locations. This choice was deliberate, and it tells us that the stones themselves held a deep, intrinsic meaning. The first type of stone, the one that creates the iconic outer circle and the massive inner trilithons, is a type of incredibly hard sandstone called sarsen. These are the true giants of Stonehenge. The largest of them weigh over 40 tons, the equivalent of 6 full-grown African elephants, and stand over 20 feet high. For centuries, the origin of these colossal sarsen stones was a mystery. They seemed alien to the chalky landscape of the Salisbury Plain. It wasn't until recently, through advanced chemical analysis, that scientists were able to pinpoint their exact source. They were traced to a place called West Woods, in the Marlborough Downs, about 20 miles north of Stonehenge. Now, 20 miles might not sound like a great distance to us today, but we must try to imagine it through the eyes of a Neolithic builder. There were no roads, only dense forests, rolling hills, and marshy river valleys. And in West Woods, these stones were not neatly cut blocks waiting in a quarry. They were massive, naturally occurring boulders, half buried in the earth. The first challenge, therefore, was extraction. Armed with nothing more than stone malchevy, rounded stones used as hammers and wooden wedges, The ancient quarrymen would have had to identify the best sarsen boulders. They would then have to dig massive pits around them to expose them. The process of shaping them would have been painstakingly slow. Teams of workers would have spent weeks, perhaps months, relentlessly pounding away at a single boulder, using the stone mauls to chip away at the surface, slowly sculpting the rough boulder into a rectangular block. To split the rock, they may have used a clever technique involving fire and water. They would light a huge fire against the rock face and then douse it with cold water, causing the stone to crack from the thermal shock. Then they would drive wooden wedges into the cracks and soak them with water. As the wood swelled, it would exert a slow, immense pressure, eventually splitting the massive stone along the desired line. Every single one of the dozens of sarsen stones at Stonehenge would have required this same back-breaking, time-consuming process. It was a testament to incredible patience and perseverance. But this was only the first part of the challenge. The sarsens may have been the largest stones, but they were not the most mysterious. That distinction belongs to the smaller stones that form the inner circle and the inner horseshoe shape, the famous bluestones. The term bluestone is a geological catch-all for a variety of volcanic and igneous rocks, primarily dolerite and rhyolite. When they are freshly broken or wet, they take on a distinctive bluish-gray hue, which is likely why they were so highly valued. For centuries, no one knew where they came from. They are not native to the Salisbury Plain. Then in the 1920s, a geologist named H. Thomas made a stunning discovery. By matching the precise mineral composition of the Stonehenge bluestones to rock outcroppings across Britain, he traced their origin to one specific remote location: the Preseli Hills in Pembrokeshire, Wales. Let that sink in. The Preseli Hills are over 150 miles away from Stonehenge as the crow flies, and the actual overland and sea route would have been much longer, perhaps closer to 240 miles. The builders of Stonehenge had identified a specific type of stone in a remote Welsh mountain range, and had decided that they needed to transport dozens of these stones, each weighing between 2 and 5 tons, across a vast and difficult landscape to their sacred site in southern England. This wasn't a matter of convenience, it was a pilgrimage. The bluestones themselves were clearly the objective. There must have been something incredibly special about them, something rooted in myth, magic, or ancestral tradition. Some archaeologists believe the bluestones may have been part of an even older stone circle in Wales, and that a migrating tribe brought their sacred stones with them to their new home. Whatever the reason, this decision transformed an already monumental construction project into an epic, multi-generational logistical challenge of staggering proportions. The sourcing of the stones alone, from two distinct and distant quarries, demonstrates a level of planning, organization, and dedication that is difficult for us to comprehend. Once the stones were quarried and roughly shaped, the next great challenge began: how to move them. This is perhaps the most debated aspect of Stonehenge's construction. How did a society without the wheel, without cranes, and without large draft animals like oxen manage to transport 40-ton megaliths across miles of unforgiving terrain? The answer lies in a combination of brute force, human ingenuity, and an intimate knowledge of the landscape. Let's first consider the journey of the massive sarsen stones from West Woods, a distance of about 20 miles. The most widely accepted theory is that the builders used a system of sledges and rollers. A huge wooden sledge would have been constructed, and the massive sarsen stone would have been painstakingly levered onto it. The path ahead would have been cleared of trees and obstacles. A track of logs, acting as rollers, would be laid down in front of the sledge. Then hundreds of people, pulling on thick ropes woven from plant fibers or animal hide, would have begun to haul the immense load forward. It would have been agonizingly slow work. As the sledge moved over the front rollers, the rollers left behind would be picked up and carried to the front to create a continuous track. The progress would have been measured in feet per day, not miles. Modern experiments have tried to replicate this process. In 2000, A team of volunteers in the television show Secrets of the Dead attempted to move a 40-ton stone using these prehistoric methods. With over 130 people pulling, they managed to move the stone, but it was an incredibly difficult and dangerous process. The slightest incline required a monumental effort. Going downhill was even more perilous, requiring a complex system of ropes and stakes to prevent the multi-ton stone from running out of control. The 20-mile journey from Westwoods to Stonehenge would have likely taken many months, perhaps even years, for a single stone. And there are over 80 sarsen stones at the site. The sheer manpower and coordination required are mind-boggling. It would have required the labor of thousands of people, all working together under a unified command, all dedicated to a single sacred purpose. Now consider the journey of the Bluestones from Wales. This was a logistical puzzle of an entirely different order of magnitude. The 240-mile journey would have crossed mountains, rivers, and even a significant stretch of open sea. It is highly unlikely that they were dragged overland for the entire distance. A more plausible theory involves a combination of land and water transport. The ancient engineers would have first dragged the Bluestones down from the high quarries in the Preseli Hills to the coast of Wales. This overland portion alone would have been a major undertaking. Then they would have had to construct massive rafts, perhaps by lashing together multiple large dugout canoes or by building huge platforms on top of hide-covered wooden frames. Getting a 5-ton stone onto a raft in the choppy coastal waters would have been incredibly dangerous. Once loaded, the journey by sea would have been perilous. They would have had to navigate the treacherous waters of the Bristol Channel, a body of water known for its powerful tides and strong currents. Any storm or navigational error could have sent their precious, sacred cargo to the bottom of the sea. It's highly likely that many stones were lost along the way. After the sea voyage, they would have entered the river systems of southern England, possibly traveling up the River Avon. This would have involved more hauling and pulling from the riverbanks, fighting against the current. The final leg of the journey would have been another overland drag from the river to the construction site on the Salisbury Plain. This entire process, from quarrying a single bluestone in Wales to finally getting it to Stonehenge, could have taken a decade or more. The fact that they repeated this process for at least 80 bluestones is a testament to a level of social organization and long-term planning that fundamentally challenges our preconceived notions of prehistoric societies. This was not the work of a small, scattered tribe. This was a massive, coordinated, multi-generational national project, the prehistoric equivalent of building a cathedral or a pyramid. It required engineers, planners, foremen, and thousands of laborers, all sharing a common vision and a faith strong enough to move mountains or at least, to move megaliths across hundreds of miles. After years, perhaps decades, of unimaginable effort, the stones finally arrived at their destination on the Salisbury Plain. But the work was far from over. Now came the final and in many ways the most sophisticated part of the process, erecting the stone circle. How did they raise these 40-ton monoliths into a vertical position and then, even more incredibly, lift 10-ton lintel stones on top of them to create the iconic ring? This was a feat of prehistoric precision engineering. To raise the massive upright sarsen stones, the builders would have first dug a massive hole for each stone. One side of the hole would have a gentle, sloping ramp, while the other 3 sides would be vertical, often lined with wooden stakes to prevent collapse. The giant stone would then be dragged or levered down the ramp until its base slid into the hole. Once the base was in position, the real work of lifting began. Using a complex system of long wooden levers and A-frame cranes, and with hundreds of people pulling on ropes, the stone would have been slowly, painstakingly pivoted upwards into a vertical position. As it rose, the hole behind it would be filled with rubble and packed earth to secure it in place. Each successful raising would have been a moment of immense triumph and communal celebration, but also of extreme danger. A snapping rope or a slipping lever could have sent the multi-ton stone crashing down, killing anyone in its path. But the true genius of the Stonehenge builders is revealed in what they did next. They didn't just place the stones next to each other. They shaped them and joined them together with a level of craftsmanship that is utterly astounding for the Stone Age. Look closely at the tops of the upright sarsen stones. You will see small, protruding knobs of stone. These are called tenons. Now look at the undersides of the massive horizontal lintel stones that once formed the complete outer circle. You will see corresponding holes called mortices carved into them. The builders had invented the mortise and tenon joint, a classic woodworking technique, and applied it to stone. They would slowly raise the lintel stone, possibly by building a massive timber platform or by gradually raising it on a growing pile of earth, until it was high enough to be shifted sideways and lowered into place, with the tenons locking securely into the mortises. This ensured the ring was stable and strong, able to withstand the winds and the passage of millennia. They didn't stop there. The lintel stones were not just locked downwards, they were locked sideways to each other using another woodworking technique, a tongue and groove joint. One end of a lintel stone would have a vertical groove carved into it, and the next stone would have a corresponding vertical tongue. When placed together, they interlocked, creating a smooth, strong, and continuous circle of stone. This is a level of detail and sophistication that was entirely unnecessary for the structural integrity of the monument. It was a matter of aesthetics, of a desire for perfection. They wanted their monument to be not just big, but beautiful and perfectly crafted. They even carved the lintel stones with a slight curve, so that when joined together, they would form a perfect circle. They used visual tricks as well, carving the upright stones to be slightly wider at the top than at the bottom, a technique known as entasis, which corrects for the optical illusion of the stone looking top-heavy. This is the same technique that the ancient Greeks would later use on the columns of the Parthenon, thousands of years later. The construction of Stonehenge was not a single event, but a project that spanned over 1,500 years, with several distinct phases of building, redesigning, and rebuilding. The first phase, around 300 BC, wasn't a stone circle at all, but a massive circular earthwork ditch and bank, with a ring of 56 pits, now known as the Aubrey Holes. It was in this early phase that the site was used as a major cremation cemetery. The first stones to arrive were the bluestones from Wales, which were initially set up in a different arrangement before being dismantled. The final, iconic phase, with the massive sarsen trilithons and the outer circle, was constructed around 2500 BC. This long, evolving history shows that Stonehenge was a place of immense and sustained importance. It was not the vision of a single leader, but a sacred project that was passed down through at least 70 generations. The sheer scale of the labor, the incredible distances the stones were transported, the ingenuity of the engineering, and the sophisticated craftsmanship all point to one undeniable conclusion. The people who built Stonehenge were not the primitive, disorganized savages they are sometimes imagined to be. They were a complex, highly organized society, capable of large-scale project management, advanced engineering, and long-term abstract planning. They possessed a deep understanding of mathematics, geometry, and, as we will see, astronomy. The construction of Stonehenge was an act of faith so profound and a feat of labor so immense that it has few parallels in the ancient world. It required a society to dedicate a huge portion of its resources and its people for centuries, all for a purpose we can now only guess at. Having stood in awe of how they built it, we can now finally turn to the even deeper mystery. Why? The construction of Stonehenge stands as one of the most incredible achievements of the ancient world. The sheer human effort involved in moving and shaping those colossal stones is a mystery in itself. But once we have absorbed the shock of how it was built, we are faced with the even more profound and enduring question: why? Why would a prehistoric society dedicate centuries of labor, resources, and generations of their people to this single monumental project? The stones themselves are silent. They offer no inscriptions, no carvings of gods or kings to tell us their story. To understand their purpose, we must become detectives, piecing together clues from the earth, the bones, and the very alignment of the stones against the sky. In recent decades, archaeologists have moved beyond mere speculation and have developed several powerful, evidence-based theories. These mainstream theories, born from careful excavation and scientific analysis, paint a picture of Stonehenge not as a single-purpose structure, but as a complex, multi-layered sacred landscape that served as a place for the dead, a clock for the heavens, and a destination for the desperate. The oldest and perhaps most fundamental purpose of Stonehenge is rooted in the most universal of human concerns: what happens to us after we die? Long before the first massive sarsen stone was ever raised, the site on the Salisbury Plain was already a place of immense significance, a vast and sacred burial ground. The archaeological evidence for this is undeniable. The very first monumental structure at the site, built around 300 BC, was not a stone circle at all. It was a massive circular earthwork, a ditch and a bank enclosing a space about the size of a football field. And dotted around the inner edge of this bank was a ring of 56 deep pits, dug into the chalky ground. For years, the purpose of these pits, now known as the Aubrey Holes after their 17th-century discoverer John Aubrey, was a mystery. But in the 21st century, new excavations of these pits provided a stunning answer. They were graves. Archaeologists carefully excavated the contents of the Aubrey Holes and found them filled with human remains. These were not intact skeletons, but cremated bones, the ashes and bone fragments of the dead, which had been carefully gathered after a funeral pyre and placed in bags of leather or cloth before being buried in these sacred pits. Through detailed analysis of these fragments, scientists have been able to identify the remains of at least 60 different individuals: men, women, and even some children. This discovery transformed our understanding of Stonehenge's origins. It was not born as an astronomical observatory or a temple of worship in the abstract sense. It began its life as a cemetery, a city of the dead. And this was not a common graveyard for ordinary people. The individuals buried here were likely the elite of their society. They were chieftains, priestesses, and the leaders of powerful families, the very people who would have had the authority to command the labor needed to create such a monument. Stonehenge was their final resting place, a statement of their power and spiritual importance, even in death. The circular ditch and bank acted as a barrier, separating the sacred realm of the ancestors within from the profane world of the living without. It was a place where the community could come to honor its most important ancestral spirits, to seek their guidance, and to reaffirm the lineage and power of the ruling class. This function as a burial site was not just a brief early phase. It continued for at least 500 years. Even after the great stones were erected, people continued to be buried within and around the circle, reinforcing the idea that the entire landscape was, at its heart, a domain of the dead. The great stones, in this view, were erected later as a magnificent tombstone, a permanent, awe-inspiring temple built to stand eternal guard over the ashes of the founding ancestors. This theory provides a powerful and very human motive for the construction. What could inspire a society to undertake such a monumental task, more than the desire to create a lasting memorial for their most revered leaders, a sacred home for the spirits who watched over them? The immense labor involved becomes an act of devotion, a communal sacrifice to honor the dynasty that led them. The stones were not just architectural elements. They were eternal guardians, silent sentinels watching over the remains of the very people who had commanded their creation. This vision of Stonehenge as a magnificent, multi-generational necropolis, a cathedral built for the ancestors, is one of the most compelling and well-supported theories we have. It grounds the mystery in the fundamental human need to remember, to honor, and to connect with those who came before us. But the story told by the bones is only part of the puzzle. As archaeologists studied the monument further, they discovered another layer of meaning, one that was not buried in the earth, but was written in the sky. It became clear that the builders of Stonehenge were not just architects and undertakers. They were brilliant astronomers. The entire monument is a massive celestial instrument, a stone clock aligned with breathtaking precision to the movements of the sun and, some argue, the moon. This is not a matter of interpretation. It is a demonstrable geometric fact. The most famous and undeniable alignment is with the sun on the solstices. If you stand in the very center of the stone circle and look out towards the northeast, your gaze is directed down a long formal pathway known as the avenue. Your line of sight passes directly between the stones of the great central trilithon and through the main entrance of the outer circle. And there, positioned on the horizon, is a single solitary standing stone known as the heel stone. On the morning of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, a person standing at the center of Stonehenge would see the sun rise directly over the peak of the heel stone. It is a moment of pure celestial theater, a perfect union of stone and starlight, engineered to happen by the monument's creators 4,500 years ago. The alignment is just as precise in the opposite direction. On the evening of the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, someone standing at the entrance of the avenue and looking back into the heart of the circle would see the sun set perfectly in the gap of the great central trilithon. These two alignments are too perfect to be a coincidence. They are the architectural and spiritual axis of the entire monument. The summer solstice marked the peak of the sun's power, a time of light and life, crucial for a farming community that depended on the sun for its crops. The winter solstice marked the opposite, the death of the old year and the rebirth of the new, a time of feasting and ritual to ensure that the sun would return and the world would be reborn from the darkness of winter. Stonehenge, in this interpretation, was a massive sacred calendar. It was a way for this prehistoric society to mark the turning of the great wheel of the year. The solstices were likely the dates of the most important religious festivals, and the entire community would have gathered at the stone circle to witness these celestial events, led by priests or shamans who understood the movements of the heavens. The monument gave them a sense of order and predictability in a chaotic world. It allowed them to track time, to know when to plant their crops, when to harvest, and when to hold their most sacred ceremonies. It connected their earthly lives directly to the grand, eternal cycles of the cosmos. Some researchers believe the astronomical functions of Stonehenge were even more sophisticated. In the 1960s, an astronomer named Gerald Hawkins used an early computer to analyze all of the monument's alignments. He claimed to have found that Stonehenge could not only mark the solstices, but could also be used to predict complex and frightening celestial events, such as lunar and solar eclipses. The ring of 56 Aubrey holes, he argued, could have been used as a type of prehistoric computer. By moving markers or stones from one hole to the next in a specific sequence, the ancient priests could have tracked the complex cycles of the moon and predicted when it would pass through the Earth's shadow. For a prehistoric people, an eclipse would have been a terrifying event, a moment when the sun or moon was seemingly devoured by a monster in the sky. To be able to predict such an event would have given the priesthood immense power and authority. They would have appeared to have control over the very heavens. While the eclipse prediction theory is still debated by many archaeologists, the core function of Stonehenge as a solstice calendar is now universally accepted. It was a place where heaven and earth met, where the cycles of human life were synchronized with the great cycles of the sun. This vision of Stonehenge as a celestial computer, a silent stone observatory, does not contradict the theory of it being a burial ground. In fact, it complements it perfectly. The two purposes could easily have coexisted. The spirits of the great ancestors, buried in the sacred ground, would have been seen as mediators between the people and the gods of the sky. The solstices would have been the most powerful times to communicate with these ancestral spirits, the moments when the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead was at its thinnest. Stonehenge was both a tomb and a clock, a place to honor the dead and to track the eternal dance of the cosmos. This brings us to the third major mainstream theory, one that has gained significant traction in recent years. This theory suggests that Stonehenge was not just a place for the dead and a clock for the heavens, but also a destination for the living, specifically for the sick and the desperate. It proposes that Stonehenge was a great center of healing, a prehistoric version of a hospital or a pilgrimage site like Lourdes, where people traveled from hundreds of miles away in search of miraculous cures. The evidence for this theory comes from several different sources. First, there are the blue stones themselves. As we know, these stones were brought on an epic 240-mile journey from the Preseli Hills in Wales. This incredible effort suggests they were seen as possessing a profound and unique power. In later Welsh folklore, and even up until the 18th century, the springs and waters that flow from the Preseli Hills were believed to have magical healing properties. The stones from this sacred landscape were thought to be imbued with this same curative power. People would chip off small fragments of the blue stones to use as protective amulets or to grind into potions. It's possible that this belief stretches all the way back to the Neolithic period. The builders may have believed that by erecting these magical stones at their sacred site, they were creating a powerful source of healing energy for their entire community. This idea is strongly supported by the human remains found buried at the site. A team of archaeologists led by Professor Tim Darvill and Professor Jeffrey Wainwright, who have been champions of the healing theory, have closely examined the skeletons buried at Stonehenge. They discovered that a significant number of these individuals were not healthy. Their bones show clear evidence of severe, debilitating diseases and gruesome injuries. They found skeletons with signs of advanced arthritis, with badly broken and poorly healed bones, and with evidence of serious infections that would have left them in chronic pain. One particularly famous burial, that of the Amesbury Archer, a man buried a few miles from Stonehenge during its final phase of use, showed that he had a horrific knee injury that would have left him with a permanent, agonizing limp. He also had a serious dental abscess that would have been life-threatening. The crucial detail is that many of these sick and injured individuals were not local to the Salisbury Plain. Isotope analysis of their tooth enamel, which retains a chemical signature of the water they drank as children, has shown that they came from far and wide, from Wales, from Ireland, and even from as far away as continental Europe. Why would people who were seriously ill undertake a long and arduous journey to Stonehenge? The most compelling answer is that they were on a pilgrimage. They were coming to Stonehenge in the desperate hope that the power of the stones, or the power of the ancestral spirits buried there, could heal their afflictions. The site, therefore, becomes a place of immense hope and suffering. It was a prehistoric center for therapeutic rituals. Perhaps the sick would have spent time within the stone circle, believing they were bathing in its healing energies. Perhaps they would have touched the sacred blue stones or drunk water that had been poured over them. The priests or shamans of Stonehenge would have acted as the world's first doctors, presiding over these healing ceremonies. This theory paints a deeply compassionate picture of the monument. It was a place of community, where the healthy cared for the sick, and where people came together to seek relief from the pain and suffering of the ancient world. Again, this theory does not exclude the others. A place of the dead can also be a place of healing, as the ancestral spirits could be the ones who were called upon to perform the miraculous cures. And the astronomical alignments would have been crucial for timing these healing rituals. Perhaps the solstices were considered the most potent time for healing, when the power of the sun and the stones was at its peak. So, when we combine these three mainstream theories, a rich and complex picture of Stonehenge begins to emerge. It was not a place with a single simple function. It was a dynamic, evolving sacred center that served multiple, overlapping purposes for over 1,500 years. It was a great necropolis, a cathedral built to house and honor the spirits of the ancestors. It was a magnificent astronomical observatory, a stone calendar that connected the community to the cosmic rhythms of the sun and moon. And it was a renowned center for healing, a destination for pilgrims who traveled across the ancient world seeking cures for their bodies and peace for their souls. It was a place of death, a place of time, and a place of life. This unified vision is the closest that mainstream archaeology has come to solving the riddle of Stonehenge. It presents a purpose that is grand, complex, and deeply human. But even this powerful, evidence-based synthesis does not satisfy everyone. For some, the mystery of Stonehenge is far deeper, far stranger, and points to possibilities that lie far beyond the realm of conventional history. The mainstream archaeological theories provide a compelling and deeply human picture of Stonehenge. A place for the dead, a clock for the heavens, a destination for the sick. These ideas are grounded in evidence and paint a rich portrait of a sophisticated Neolithic society. For many, this is where the story ends, with a satisfying, albeit complex, explanation. But for others, this is merely the surface layer. The officially sanctioned story that papers over a much deeper, stranger, and more profound truth. The sheer scale of Stonehenge's construction, the baffling precision of its alignments, and the almost palpable sense of ancient power that radiates from the stones have always invited more speculative, more mystical, and more otherworldly explanations. This is where we leave the solid ground of peer-reviewed archaeology and venture into the fog of fringe theory, folklore, and high strangeness. We must now explore the questions that linger at the edges of the mainstream narrative, the theories that suggest Stonehenge's purpose was not just about burials and calendars, but about magic, sound, and a connection to the stars that may not have been entirely human. Our journey into these fringe theories begins with the most famous and enduring legend ever attached to Stonehenge, a story that has so thoroughly permeated our culture that, for many people, it is the only story they know. This is the legend of the Druids. When we close our eyes and picture Stonehenge, the image that often comes to mind is not of Neolithic farmers, but of white-robed, bearded figures with long flowing hair, gathering at dawn on the summer solstice to perform arcane and bloody rituals. This image of the Druids, the mystical Celtic priesthood, using Stonehenge as their great open-air temple, is powerful and evocative. It was a vision popularized in the 17th and 18th centuries by antiquarians like John Aubrey and William Stukeley, who were the first to systematically study the monument. They were captivated by the romantic idea of a lost, magical British past, and saw the stone circle as the ultimate expression of the Druids' power. This connection has been cemented in the public imagination ever since, inspiring modern Druidic orders who still gather at the stones to celebrate the solstices. The legend claims that the Druids were the architects and priests of Stonehenge. They were said to be masters of astronomy, magic, and nature, and the Great Stone Circle was their university and their cathedral. Some tales even claim they used magical powers to levitate the stones from Wales and set them in place. The Roman accounts of the Druids, written by figures like Julius Caesar, describe them as a powerful and secretive intellectual class who presided over religious ceremonies, acted as judges, and studied the movements of the stars. They were known to have held their rituals in sacred groves of oak trees, but the idea that they would also use a magnificent stone temple like Stonehenge seemed perfectly logical. The connection felt right. It gave the silent stones a priesthood, a philosophy, and a face. But there is one massive, insurmountable problem with this captivating theory. The timeline is completely wrong. Modern archaeological dating, particularly through radiocarbon analysis, has proven this beyond any doubt. The final and most impressive phase of Stonehenge, the construction of the Great Sarsen Circle and the Trilithons, was completed around 2500 BC. The Druids, as a distinct cultural and religious group, did not emerge in Britain until much later during the Iron Age. The earliest historical evidence for the Druids dates to around 300 BC. This means that Stonehenge was already ancient, already a ruin from a forgotten age, by the time the first Druids came to power. The time gap between the construction of Stonehenge and the rise of the Druids is over 2,000 years. That is a longer span of time than the one that separates us from the height of the Roman Empire. So the Druids did not build Stonehenge. They were not its original priests. It is certainly possible and even likely that they recognized Stonehenge as a powerful, ancient, and sacred place. They would have seen its clear astronomical alignments and understood its significance. They may well have used the site for their own ceremonies, adopting this ancient temple into their own religious practices. They would have been the inheritors of the site, not its creators. But the romantic image of Druid priests directing the placement of the great sarsen stones is pure fantasy. The truth is far more mysterious. The people who built Stonehenge were far more ancient than the Druids, a people whose name, language, and beliefs are now completely lost to history. The Druid theory, while culturally powerful, is a historical dead end. It solves the mystery by attributing it to the wrong people, leaving the true identity of the builders shrouded in an even deeper fog. Since we cannot know who the builders were, perhaps we can get closer to their purpose by considering how they experienced the monument. We tend to think of ancient sites in purely visual terms: how they looked, how they were aligned with the sun. But what if Stonehenge was designed not just for the eyes but for the ears? This is the central question behind one of the most fascinating and scientifically testable fringe theories: that Stonehenge was a sophisticated acoustic chamber, a prehistoric concert hall designed to manipulate sound in powerful and transformative ways. This idea stems from the modern field of archaeoacoustics, which studies the sound properties of ancient sites. Researchers have begun to realize that ancient builders all over the world, from the makers of Mayan pyramids to the creators of Neolithic burial chambers, had a deep and intuitive understanding of sound. They built structures that could amplify speech, create strange echoes, or generate low-frequency resonance that could have a profound psychological and even physiological effect on people. In 2012, a team of scientists from the University of Salford decided to apply this science to Stonehenge. Since they couldn't conduct their tests at the actual monument, they did the next best thing. They built a precise 1/12 scale model of Stonehenge as it would have looked in 2500 BC, with all 157 stones in their original positions. They called it Stonehenge Recreated. They then placed speakers and microphones inside the scale model and conducted a series of sophisticated acoustic tests, playing a range of sounds and measuring how they behaved within the stone circle. What they found was remarkable. The dense ring of stones acted as a powerful acoustic barrier. It blocked a significant amount of outside noise, creating a pocket of relative silence and seclusion in the middle of the open, windy plain. But more importantly, the stones had a dramatic effect on the sounds created inside the circle. The hard, flat surfaces of the sarsen stones reflected the sound waves, causing them to bounce around within the circle, creating a rich and complex pattern of reverberation. The sound didn't just dissipate, it lingered in the air. The reverberation time inside the circle was significantly longer than outside, creating an effect similar to what you might experience in a large, partially enclosed room or a modern concert hall. What would this have meant for a Neolithic ceremony? A person speaking or chanting in the center of the circle would have had their voice naturally amplified, making them sound louder and more powerful. The sound of drumming would have been deep and resonant, the beat echoing off the stones and surrounding the participants. The acoustic properties would have been perfect for creating a hypnotic, trance-like atmosphere. The overlapping echoes and resonant frequencies could have disoriented the senses and induced altered states of consciousness, which were likely a key part of ancient religious rituals. The stone circle was not just a visual spectacle, it was a soundscape. It was an instrument that was designed to be played by human voices, drums, and chants, creating an immersive multisensory experience that would transport the participants to the realm of the spirits. This theory offers a whole new dimension to our understanding of the monument's purpose. It suggests that the builders were not just engineers and astronomers but also sound designers. The precise placement of the stones may have been determined not just by astronomical alignments, but by acoustic properties as well. Perhaps they moved the stones around, tuning the circle until it produced the exact sound they wanted. This idea is compelling because it provides a functional reason for the monument's specific, enclosed shape. It was a machine for creating a sacred sound environment, a place where the barrier between the human and the divine could be dissolved through the power of sound. The evidence is compelling, but it is still a theory. We can't know for sure how the Neolithic people used sound in their rituals, but the acoustic tests prove that the monument does have these unique properties. Whether by accident or by design, Stonehenge is an acoustic anomaly. This adds another layer of complexity to its purpose, suggesting that the experience of being at Stonehenge was meant to engage all the senses, creating a powerful tool for religious and mystical experience. But even this incredible science-based theory is not strange enough for some. For the final set of theories, we must take a giant leap into the unknown, to ideas that propose a purpose for Stonehenge that is not human at all. This brings us to the final and most speculative question, the one that pushes the boundaries of belief and enters the realm of high strangeness. Was Stonehenge built with non-human assistance or for a non-human purpose? This is the core of the ancient alien theory as it applies to Stonehenge. Proponents of this idea look at the impossible feat of construction, the seemingly miraculous transportation of 40-ton stones, and the breathtaking astronomical precision, and they conclude that it simply could not have been done by Neolithic people with their primitive tools. The technological gap is just too vast. Therefore, they argue there must have been an outside influence. The builders must have had help. This help could have come in several forms. One version of the theory suggests that the builders were in possession of a lost, ancient technology, a science of levitation or acoustic resonance that allowed them to manipulate massive objects with ease. Perhaps they knew how to harness the Earth's natural energy fields, or use sound frequencies to nullify gravity. This would make them not primitive people, but the inheritors of a forgotten, magical science from a much older, lost civilization like Atlantis. But the more popular version of the theory is that the assistance was not from a lost human civilization, but from an extraterrestrial one. Was Stonehenge designed by alien architects? Were the stones lifted into place using the advanced tractor beam technology of an alien spacecraft? In this view, the monument was a collaborative project between primitive humans and their powerful star gods. The local people provided the manual labor, while the alien visitors provided the advanced engineering and technological know-how. This would explain the sudden leap in sophistication seen at Stonehenge, a feat of engineering that seems to come out of nowhere in the archaeological record. If aliens were involved, what was their purpose? Why would an advanced interstellar race be interested in helping a group of Stone Age humans build a stone circle on a remote English plain? The theories are as varied as they are imaginative. One popular idea is that Stonehenge was an energy source. Many researchers who study Earth mysteries have noted that Stonehenge is located at a nexus of what they call ley lines. These are hypothetical lines of powerful, natural telluric energy that are believed to crisscross the globe, connecting ancient sacred sites. Stonehenge, in this view, was built at a powerful intersection of these lines to act as a massive energy accumulator, a sort of prehistoric power plant. The specific type of stone used, particularly the crystalline structure of the blue stones, was chosen for its ability to conduct and amplify this energy. The purpose of this energy could have been for healing, for opening portals to other dimensions, or even for powering alien spacecraft. This leads to another popular theory, that Stonehenge was a landing pad or a navigational beacon for alien vessels. Its clear circular shape and its isolated location on a flat plain would make it an ideal landmark from the air. The precise astronomical alignments would not have been for tracking human seasons, but for helping alien ships navigate, using the Earth's position relative to the Sun and other stars as a fixed reference point. The monument was a giant, stony welcome mat for visitors from the stars, a prehistoric airport for UFOs. Some have even suggested that the great trilithons, with their massive lintel stones, were designed as docking gantries for visiting spacecraft. A third related theory is that Stonehenge was a communications device, a beacon for sending and receiving signals from the cosmos. The circle, with its specific stones and precise geometry, may have been designed to function as a giant antenna. The acoustic properties we discussed earlier could have been part of this. Perhaps certain sound frequencies, when generated within the circle, could create a resonant energy field capable of transmitting a signal across interstellar distances. The rituals performed at the solstices were not just to honor the sun. They were attempts to call home, to communicate with the star gods who had gifted them this incredible technology. The entire monument was a giant, silent telephone to the stars, its message waiting to be decoded. These theories are, of course, impossible to prove. They exist far outside the realm of mainstream science and archaeology. There is no physical evidence, no alien artifacts, no remnants of lost technology to support them. They are built entirely on inference, on the argument from incredulity. I can't believe primitive people could do this, therefore it must be aliens. Mainstream scientists are quick to dismiss these ideas as pure pseudoscience, pointing out that the ingenuity of ancient people should not be underestimated. They argue that we don't need to invent alien helpers to explain Stonehenge. We just need to appreciate the incredible intelligence, organization, and dedication of our own human ancestors. And yet, the alien beacon theory endures. It persists because it speaks to the deep, almost spiritual sense of awe that Stonehenge inspires. When you stand before those massive silent stones, it is hard not to feel that you are in the presence of something that is not entirely of this world. The scale is inhuman. The precision is baffling. The purpose remains profoundly elusive. While science provides rational and plausible answers, they can sometimes feel emotionally unsatisfying. They don't fully capture the magic of the place. The fringe theories, for all their lack of evidence, do capture that magic. They offer an explanation that is as grand and awe-inspiring as the monument itself. They transform Stonehenge from an ancient human achievement into a relic of a cosmic history, a tangible link between our own small world and the vast, unknown universe. Whether it was a tomb for ancestors, a clock for the seasons, a chamber for sacred sounds, or a beacon for distant stars, Stonehenge's true purpose remains its greatest secret. The stones guard their story well, leaving us to wonder, to question, and to search for answers in the silent spaces between myth, science, and the boundless possibilities of the unknown. Stonehenge remains a monument to human ingenuity and enduring mystery. Whether it was a tomb, a calendar, or an energy source, its true purpose is lost to time. The silent stones challenge us, reminding us that some secrets of our ancient past may be kept forever. If the past still whispers to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Ancient Relics Keeper, because some mysteries were never meant to be buried.